This is Sadie's Garden by Chad Ryan. Sadie resided with her mother in a quaint cottage near a verdant clearing with a beautiful garden and stream. In the garden rested the grave of her father. When Mr. Herbert came to visit in the afternoons, Sadie frolicked amongst flowers while he and mother kept inside the cottage. Sadie never minded the time to herself. She did not like Mr. Herbert at all. He was a grumpy old louse with a crooked spine that walked with a cane. Worst of all, he called Sadie Little Piglet. She looked forward to seeing his dark buggy sputter away every sundown. Each time, she wished for it to never return. One day, while catching butterflies in the garden, Sadie skipped by the grave of her father. She found a curious thing on top of the dirt mound, a rather large caterpillar. This caterpillar was green and purple with striped fuzzy hairs longer than stalks of wild grass. Deep black eyes watched her from painted rings of rich violet. The poor beast coiled and flopped, struggling to find footing in the dirt. Sadie noted the long branches of the oak tree shading the grave of her father. Had this wayward creature fallen from one? Was it hurt? She poked it with her net to find out. The caterpillar let out a small hissing cry. Sadie pulled back, convinced the creature needed care. "You poor thing," she said, daring to brush her fingertips across its plumes of soft flaxen hair. The caterpillar moaned and rolled, dirt and twigs dirtying its vibrant hues. "Sadie!" Mother called from the doorway of the cottage. Mr. Herbert limped towards his dark buggy, grim and gnarled as a dead tree. "I have to go," the girl told the caterpillar, "but I'm going to make you supper first." Sadie scooped up armfuls of fresh damp leaves. She made a comfortable bed upon the grave of her father for her new friend. It didn't take long for the creature's sharp mandibles to start tearing into fiber and frond. It chittered away and clicked with delight. The girl smiled. "That's more like it." "Sadie!" her mother called again crossly. "See you tomorrow, Mr. Caterpillar." She waved farewell before running back to the cottage. The next day, Sadie did not fuss about spending another afternoon in the garden, nor did she mind Mr. Herbert calling her a little piglet as they passed each other on the cottage path. She had thought about the curious caterpillar all night. "My, you've grown so big," Sadie said, petting its smooth body. The caterpillar flexed and squeezed. "Far too heavy to move now, but I suppose you're still hungry." Sadie collected more leaves to bury her friend beneath a feast. She laughed when its fat head poked through the pile, mandibles clacking, its black eyes absorbing the sunshine. "You're such a silly creature, aren't you?" When Mr. Herbert's dark buggy rattled down the road, Sadie joined her mother inside the cottage for dinner. Mother was pensive that evening and wouldn't eat a bite of stew. "Do you fancy Mr. Herbert?" she asked. Sadie wiped broth from her chin and shrugged. Mother sighed and rose from the table. "It doesn't matter," she said. "Affection is the least of it, I suppose." And with that, Mother walked into the shadowy corner of their cottage. There she would sit and look at nothing until daybreak. Day after day, Sadie filled a basket of fresh greenery for Miss Caterpillar. Her secret friend grew quite large and ate endlessly. "What do you do all day in that garden, little piglet?" Mr. Herbert asked one afternoon on the cottage path, eyes sharp as shears. Sadie looked to the dirt. "I tend to it is all, sir." "Do you pluck the flowers after they bloom?" he asked. "No, sir. They belong in the garden." Mr. Herbert smirked and stepped towards the knobbly-kneed girl, cane gripped tightly in his claw. The air chilled beneath his shadow. "You look like your mother," he said, lips glistening with spittle. When he reached for her shoulder, Sadie dropped her basket. Her feet carried her to the garden. She hated Mr. Herbert with every bit of her heart. At the grave of her father, Sadie stared at the empty bed of leaves on the dirt mound. Missing were the deep black orbs swimming in pools of violet. Gone was the pulsating green and fuzzy tube of Miss Caterpillar's coiling mesmeric body. In its place was something new. A large brown chrysalis hung from the cross of her father's tombstone. Her palm slid down the side of the silken cocoon. "Are you there?" she asked, whispering. Only a chilled wind answered, rustling the oak tree leaves above. After scrubbing and hanging the linen to dry on the line near the cottage, Sadie rested on a knoll behind the damp bedsheets. The dark buggy arrived. Mr. Herbert, bent and scowling, lurked up the cottage path, his cane striking gravel with each heavy step. In the doorway, Mother waited, arms crossed. "It happened," she said. "Very well." Mr. Herbert removed his top hat and offered a vulture's grin. "Today will be our last appointment." He took a step toward her. Mother pressed an arm into his chest. "Do you have the coins?" she asked, eyes gray and serious. Mr. Herbert chuckled, phlegm in his throat. "I do," he said. "While we undress, you may count them." Mother let him in, and the door closed. Sadie wandered into the garden, a sense of foreboding in her heart. She perched near the grave of her father, watching the chrysalis sway in the dry wind. "Things are going to be different now," she said, as a droplet of rain plopped on the bridge of her nose. "I hope you can hear me, Miss Caterpillar. I'm frightened." Mr. Herbert's dark buggy gathered raindrops on the road. He and Mother stood on the cottage path, both rain-riddled shadows. On the ground, a satchel filled with sundries. "Little Piglet," the ghoulish man said, thunder rumbling above. "It's time to say goodbye to your home. You shan't be returning here again." Sadie's stomach churned. "Mother?" But the pallid woman turned away, plodded towards the cottage, never looking back. When the door closed behind her, gone went the light within. "Mother!" The ferrule of Mr. Herbert's cane tapped on the girl's trembling shoulder. "Let us go to your new home," he said, rain spilling over the brim of his black top hat. "There you shall be my wife and live your days beneath me." Lightning flashed. Sadie ran into the surging room, slippery mud underfoot. The grey clouds above swallowed all the setting sun that remained. Even darker grew her garden. The crooked man hobbled after her, cursing and swinging his cane like a rapier. "Little Piglet," he shouted, "stop or I shall punish you greatly." But Sadie did not stop. She would rather dig herself into the soft grave of her father with the bone worms and grub hatches than be Mr. Herbert's handmaiden, wife, or doxy. A devil staggered into the dark, wet garden. The wind and rain ruffled his petticoat. There he discovered a young woman lying on the muddy grave of her father, beneath a stone cross, atop a bed of dead leaves in the shape of a halo. She cupped the bottom of a gigantic cocoon in the palm of her hand. Mr. Herbert lurked closer. "Little Piglet, I must teach you a lesson," he said. "To be a good wife, one must obey her husband." He lifted his cane to strike, his scowl deeper than a king's pocket. A clap of thunder shook the ground. The chrysalis tore open in Sadie's palm. Crimson liquid rushed down her slender arm. She grinned as it soaked her face in sweet sanguine murder dew. The creature's tiger-striped abdomen unfurled. Although Miss Caterpillar had changed, Sadie recognized the black depths of her eyes. She and it were both something else now. Beautiful, fierce, dangerous creatures. Mr. Herbert stumbled backward, aghast at the sight. "What is that beast?" Miss Caterpillar pumped sacred blood into her glorious emerald and lilac wings for the first time. When it flew, Sadie saw the pale shape of a skull on its broad back. "Squeal, little piglet," the young woman whispered. "Nah!" Mr. Herbert flinched as Miss Caterpillar's sharp proboscis speared his soft eyeball, popping it like a ripe grape. The gaunt man dropped his cane and buckled into the mud. There Miss Caterpillar purred, drinking the warm nectar of his innards. Sadie stood from the grave of her father. She did not fear the monstrous skull moth that pressed Mr. Herbert's cadaver into the soaking ground. Instead, she stroked the soft fur of its warm thorax and petted its fern-like antenna that vibrated with newborn energy. "I can't stay here," Sadie said sadly. "I'm no longer a child." The ferocious moth climbed the young woman's arm, ascended her torso, and hooked onto the back of her gown. Sadie felt the beat of her new wings. Air swirled around her in a violent cyclone. Then finally, her feet left the mud of her cocoon behind.